cancellation of the PGA Century Golf Tournament has brought the issue of water usage on Maui back to the forefront.
Today, we'll be talking with Maui Land and Pineapple Company CEO Randle and a representative from the State Water Commission about the issues on Maui and beyond. Spotlight Now starts now.
Kalei Suchi and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, aloha, and thanks for tuning in here to another episode of Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. Before we get to our guests, we always want to encourage those of you who are watching at home to engage in the conversation. You can do so if you're watching online by heading over to Facebook and entering your question for our guests in the comment section on Facebook, or you can email us your questions here at spotlightnow@hawaiinewsnow.com.
And we want to get to our first guest, and that is the CEO of Maui Land and Pineapple Company, Randle, making the trip from Maui to join us today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Just first off to start, we know that you're involved in a lawsuit and now a counter lawsuit. Curious to know why you wanted to come on today and speak about this issue, because I think the instinct from a lot of companies would be to just go inward and say, we have no comment.
Yeah, I think water's a critical issue that's top of mind for everyone. And I think of our family and our team on Maui. I think it's a great opportunity to come and share a little bit of the facts of what's happening over there and what's being done about it to make sure that we do have a more stable future going forward.
Yeah, and sticking with that, let's talk big picture. How bad is the drought on West Maui right now? Where are you seeing it most acutely? And just for folks who are not in, on the land itself, where do you see it? Where do you feel it?
Yeah, you feel it everywhere. When I joined the company a few years ago, we made a focus of hiring a local team that's boots on the ground, and many of those are in West Maui. And what we're seeing this year is unprecedented. Where we heard from the state that rainfall this year is less than half of average rainfall, where it's needed most. And that affects our stream flow. If you look around, you see it, you feel it, it's dry. And this is only a few years after the fire, right? And so it creates a level of nervousness and concern that it definitely prioritizes us focusing on safety during this time.
Let's talk a little bit about what your responsibility is specifically as Maui Land and Pine with some of these water resources. We know that this is some of the contention that's behind it. So again, for context, maybe just provide an overview of the responsibility of your company to manage some of this water and some of the things that you're seeing in the midst of this drought.
Oh, good question. So Maui Land and Pineapple, we own and steward over 22,000 acres of land and resources on the island of Maui. Some of those upcountry and primarily in West Maui. And the company's owned most of those for over 100 years. So as part of that ownership, Maui Land and Pineapple developed infrastructure, water infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, all types of infrastructure over the decades to serve their needs of the land and to build communities. Today, as part of that legacy of constructing infrastructure, we do have a number of water infrastructure elements that we own and manage on Maui, both groundwater systems, wells that draw water from the ground, and also surface water systems, or those that capture water from rainfall when it happens and deliver it to users downstream.
I know that you said you took over a few years ago. In that time, how have you seen the water situation change? Is this purely environmental? Are there other forces at play that come into this?
Yeah, there's definitely some big forces. Number one, the governance of water, right? In West Maui, just in the past few years, kind of the governance of who's allowed to use water and how much and where it goes has really changed, right? And that's due to a lot of effort by the community to get the state involved, the Commission on Water Resources, which you'll hear from, who's now has responsibility and oversight over all of West Maui as a water management area. So that's definitely changed now, because the state is now in a position of looking at permitting water use, both groundwater and surface water for other users. The other thing is the fire. The fire has, I think, dramatically changed people's perspective on water availability in fire hydrants or reservoirs. I know for our family, myself, things like that burn into your mind an understanding of how important water is. I sat down the day after the fire. We had a firefighter stay at our house who had lost her home with her family. And I'll never forget, as she's sharing with my family how she couldn't put the fire out because they ran out of water. Right? I mean, that kind of thing changes very quickly how you, and for us, for our company, looks at water and prioritizing it for critical needs.
Let's talk a little bit about that prioritization of water, because that seems to be some of the issues that have come up about how water is being prioritized to whom for what usage. How do you make that determination of who gets water when, based on the levels that you're seeing and dealing with the other elements and factors that you've said are some of the issues that you're navigating through?
Yeah, I think we prioritize the public trust uses as a company, and we have the help of the state guidance on, number one, ensuring that we maintain enough stream flow in streams, and if there's enough flow in a stream beyond the minimum levels, then it's allowed to some of that water is allowed to be diverted. But the priority uses start with drinking water. So the primary user of our surface water system in West Maui is the County of Maui, who takes that fresh water, which actually falls from the Pu'ukukui watershed that sits just above it, and they convert that to drinking water for thousands of people in Lahaina. If there's enough water beyond that from a priority standpoint, then we're allowed to utilize it for irrigation use at this time. And that's for private irrigation, also for local farmers that we have on our lands in the Napili area.
So your contention is basically we just don't have enough right now.
It's a fact. I mean, if you look at it with rainfall levels less than half of average, stream flow levels at record lows and continuing, thank God it rained last night, but we are really experiencing what happens when there isn't enough rainfall for all of the users. And so as we think about the future, right, we need to consider this moment in time and understand, how do we move forward?
Let's talk about the Honokahau ditch, one of the resources that you have to oversee in order to manage this flow. There have been, within this lawsuit that the company has put forth, that there is allegations that there is this ditch has not been maintained, that this is ultimately leading to some of the issues. Maybe if you can give a context of what that source provides and the status right now of its ability to continue to let water flow into these areas.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I've spent a fair amount of time in the ditch, or in the tunnel, I should say, and the area that it sources water from. It is an extremely efficient piece of infrastructure at carrying water from one point to another, right? If there's enough water to put into it, right? And that's the key. And it's great. I mean, in the past, it delivered tens of millions of gallons of water a day from one point to another. Today, it has no issues delivering millions of gallons to the county and to others in drier areas of West Maui. So it's a critical piece of infrastructure that's highly efficient, but it needs water at the source, right? And sufficient water to be able to carry some to the drier areas.
So, by that explanation, the health of the ditch itself is not the issue. Do you think that the infrastructure of the ditch has been properly maintained, or is it time for an upgrade or a new system?
I think this drought points out that pieces of infrastructure like this are not just things we own. I mean, there's lots of these sitting around, and how can we adapt those pieces of infrastructure to meet changing climate, right? In the case of the current situation, right, where we have less rain or less frequent rainfall, how do we utilize those priceless pieces of infrastructure, but then adopt them to the new realities of weather, so that they can continue to serve a great purpose? In the case of the ditch in particular that we've talked about, both the state and the county and ourselves, we've identified storage, water storage, as a key opportunity to take a valuable piece of infrastructure like this and make it, even better into the future by having large amounts of storage where water can be stored when it rains, so that it's available during these extended periods of time without rain.
And just to give us, I think, also more context with this, because Maui Land and Pine operates many different things beyond just this water usage. You know, the responsibilities, I guess, of the company and things that you're involved in. How much would you say of the company's structure or base or the way in which you manage all these different resources is focused on just this water issue? Because you have property and land that you also are managing and own, as well as other programs that you also oversee. How much of the company's resources and time are spent within water, and what percentage, I guess, maybe does that make up of the company?
Yeah, I think in the past, more of it. In the past, we actually owned and operated the water companies ourselves. Today, it's just a handful of team members that are focused on water. We have about 20 employees, and the majority of them are not, you know, in the day-to-day of water management. We have a very capable water management company, Hawaii Water Service, that does the day-to-day management of our water systems. But while on a day-to-day it might not take up, you know, the majority of our team's time, and especially having a local team, we really understand the importance of it. And that's, again, why I'm here, is because I think we feel it, we understand how important it is, not just to our company and to the community, but the broad discussion about water resiliency is important to have.
Let's talk a little bit more about the lawsuit, because of course that is at the forefront, and I know that there are some restrictions on what you can and can't say, but Tadashi Yanai's lawsuit says that MLMP has not delivered on its water agreements. Do you know, is that accurate? And in what way is it accurate or not accurate, and why did you decide to countersue?
It's definitely not accurate. Quite the opposite, as we've shared in our countersuit. You know, it couldn't be further from the truth. You know, this summer, as an example, right, all of our water users are required to conserve when there's not enough water. You know, in June this summer, during the heat of the summer, right, and you recognize everyone's quite nervous about fire, as they should be, having been through that recently. You know, there wasn't enough water to keep the reservoirs full from the ditch flow. And when we ask our users to conserve, the golf course didn't. Right? They actually drew 11 million gallons of water from the reservoirs just in June alone when asked not to. I mean, that is a violation not of just our agreement, but that's putting lives potentially at risk, or making it harder for us to deal with fire if it comes. So that's why it's really important for us to speak the truth and to share what's going on, and in this case, you know, provide the facts.
When you heard about this and this lawsuit that came out, were you at all surprised? I mean, how was, you know, did you, I guess, anticipate this? And when you found out that they were, you know, using this amount of water during the peak of summer, and maybe providing warnings, maybe what was the response and dialogue that ultimately led them to have to take this step to file this lawsuit? And was that something of a surprise to you folks?
Yeah, I think generally we are surprised that, you know, people will choose to fight during a crisis when collaboration really will result in good solutions. I mean, I think that's key here, right? Is, you know, making it through this currently challenging time for irrigation use, to be clear, right? Because there's plenty of water in our groundwater systems to supply everyone's daily needs, right? They're critical needs. So don't worry about that. But to choose to fight about irrigation water being available during a drought did definitely surprise us, because, you know, there might be a time and place for that, but when we're focused on making sure that life and safety are protected and it's not raining, you know, it's a really challenging time to cause a fight.
What are your thoughts on the PGA's decision to move the tournament?
You know, it's definitely disappointing for the community, right? I mean, we love the PGA tournament ourselves. You know, it's a legacy that Maui Land and Pineapple has been a part of for decades. But I think it does, you know, it brings to a forefront the effects of drought and what they can have, not just on what you would normally expect, right? Like agriculture or other things that are more reliant on rainfall, but it draws, you know, to everyone's attention that drought can have an impact on other things, including sporting events.
How do you foresee this moving? Obviously, there's this lawsuit and things will have to go through this legal battle and ultimately will be decided through the court system and how things settle out eventually. But moving forward, because there are other golf courses on the island, there are other resources, other hotel properties that also use this water for maybe those same types of usages. How do you navigate that moving forward, knowing that this may continue to be an issue for years to come, knowing that water was already an issue on the island of Maui, and now factoring in the weather elements that could lead to more need for water? Just how you foresee this moving forward and navigating through some of these challenges?
I do have hope that when things like this become more widely known, that there generally results in more community consensus that these issues or these problems need to be solved, right? Because these problems can't be solved by one person alone, right? These are going to take collaboration between state, between county, private individuals, and others. I mean, think about today in West Maui, right? Today and every day, there are millions of gallons of perfectly good water for irrigation that are not put to use, right? From the wastewater treatment plant that's been treated and prepared to be used for irrigation, and it's not, right? That there's a source of water available today that could be used. And so, I mean, part of my hope is that as things like this come up, it brings that to light, and I think encourages all the parties to get involved and support long-term resiliency plans that can take advantage of available water, store water when it's infrequently available, but ultimately result in a more stable environment for people, for businesses, and others.
My understanding is that one of those partnerships or one of the changes that could come out of this is the county taking over some of these resources. So MLMP is doing an audit, basically, of my understanding of its water resources and trying to figure out what's the best path forward. Would you want to sell or lease some of these resources to the county so that they have more direct management, or what's the best sort of best case scenario out of that?
Yeah, I mean, best case scenario, as I look at water and our team looks at water, right, is that we find aligned owner-operators like the County of Maui, right, that are aligned on the prioritization of public trust uses, right? And I go there because what Maui needs is for families to feel more stable, right? They need to know that they can build a home, that they can stay there, that there's jobs, all those elements that come with a quality of life. The county has done a great job, in my opinion, of looking forward and looking at opportunities to add more water resources across the island, right? Not just West Maui, but they've also been a great partner in West Maui at looking at upgrades to infrastructure and also interconnection of infrastructure that could happen to create more resiliency. In upcountry Maui, where I grew up for a period of my life, like today, there are over 1,000 families on a waiting list to get a water meter for land they already own so they can build a home. I mean, that hits home when you go to a going away party because people are leaving the island, and then you hear that water may be an opportunity, if it's available, for them to stay. Right, so in upcountry, we have water resources that we've put on the market and been communicating with the county and others to see if those can get put into service. And these are water resources that we don't have the need for our own purposes, but they might serve the community really well.
And when you talk about water usage more broadly when it comes to housing, and because we know that this is a big issue on Maui, especially after Lahaina and the rebuild and trying to provide places for people to live, water will also become a factor in the construction and development, making sure that water resource is available for these homes, which, if it's not, may delay the progress. I mean, how do you think that this issue could impact some of Maui's efforts to not only house the community, but really rebuild after Lahaina?
I think all positive collaborative efforts on water will result in it being, and I'm hopeful, easier to solve those basic needs for families. Right, and I know you're going to hear from the State Commission on Water Resources Management, but I'm really hopeful that their efforts in West Maui to prioritize public trust uses will result in making sure that fresh water in particular is being used for those critical needs. Right, I mean, to put it in perspective, right, you have a housing crisis. We all know that we need thousands of homes in Hawaii, across the state. Maui in particular, where the median home prices is far beyond the reach of normal families. And when you look at water, there is water available. But, if groundwater, instead of being used for homes, is being used to perhaps irrigate a golf course. It's good that the public understands how much of that resource is in that trade-off, right? Because in one day, a golf course can use the equivalent of over 1,000 homes worth of water. 1,000 homes of fresh water. So when you think of criticality of what's needed, right, it's my hope that this process will result in really prioritizing water for the critical needs and then using recycled water and other water that's available for other needs.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that. I think we hear a lot about just how much we need to conserve, but the idea of repurposing gray water, for instance, I mean, what do you think is the potential for that so that we could have both of these needs met, so that you could have a house, but you could also have a golf tournament, and those two things could coexist with existing resources?
The potential is high. I mean, we're talking about an area, West Maui, it's not big, right? I mean, it is quite by some measure, but the resources are there. So it's not that they're not there. They're already there. They're already being created. Recycled water is being created today that could be used. So you've checked a lot of boxes already. Part of it is just connecting those dots, right? Getting the water from where it is to where it needs to be.
You know, this issue, as we mentioned, has really come to light again because of the cancellation of this tournament and the PGA's involvement, and now, you know, this tournament being canceled. But this has, again, been an issue that many people have been passionate about. Native Hawaiian voice has also been something that the mayor on this program has talked about the importance in when reconsidering rebuilding Lahaina and talking about water usage, the way in which it is distributed, and being sensitive to the Native Hawaiian community. You talk about just the community voice. Maybe how do you foresee this moving forward with engaging the community? What type of activities, whether it be through forums or community outreach, do you foresee Maui Land and Pine participating in to foster a healthy dialogue about how to move forward?
Absolutely. I think part of a result of this dialogue is that there are more eyes on it. I think there are more people who are tuned in. To play into that, we're actively working on making more data available, right? Because we want to make sure it's transparent, kind of where the water is, what is available, right, in the streams and the groundwater, and where is it going. And while we don't have the entire picture, we're happy to share what we know. And so our team's working on putting that, bringing that to light, making that publicly available so people can understand it better. But on the community side, I go back to it's so critical to be there and feel it, right? Because our team, and myself included, would get asked this question, like, is there a drought? Is it dry? And it's one of those things where when you're there and you see how dry it is and how brown it is, around you, you expect everyone to understand that easily. But it really requires that local connection to understand, in this case, what the critical needs are and take action.
I know we had talked about the county potentially taking over some of those resources. What is the time frame for something like that realistically? How soon could that happen?
To be determined. I think we're very nimble. We're a relatively small organization, so we can move quite fast. But the key thing there is we want to make sure we're finding the right partner and steward who is going to take assets that we may not be utilizing and put them to their best use. So we're not in a rush. And we want to make sure we have dialogue with all of the key potential stewards that could come forth.
While you do have a small team, Maui Land and Pine has vast land holdings. You guys are involved, as I mentioned earlier, in many different sectors. As someone who's taken over this company for a few years now, what is your vision long term for what you want to see done beyond just the water usage, but how this company, who has been in part of the island for hundreds of years, how you play into what the future looks like for this company moving forward?
Yes, I mean it's an absolute privilege, but it's a big responsibility to be with Maui Land and Pineapple, and I say that because with the scale of our assets, we actually do have a responsibility to make a positive impact on the community for generations to come. We can do that. When we talk about the community needs, housing, a more diverse economy, water security, food security, we can be not only a part of that, but a major player in solving a lot of those key issues for our community. And that is where we're focused most, right? Housing is a big one, but with 22,000 acres of land, there's a lot of potential to create homes, farms, businesses, diversify our economy, and help Maui thrive. I mean, my goal, personally, right, is stability, right? If we're successful, it's because when we're turning the torch or handing the torch off to the next group, we've made Maui more stable for families than it was when we started.
I want to go back to the lawsuit briefly, and that is just to ask, there's the lawsuit in the courts, and then there's a lawsuit in the court of public opinion. What do you wish that the community understood about this fight, sort of the fundamentals of it, and what you think people might be missing? Because we have heard a lot from, the initial lawsuit about what they allege is mismanagement of the ditch and mismanagement of this resource. What do you wish that people understood when they see this fight?
I generally just hope that people look for facts. And rely on facts and truth and make their own conclusions on it. That'll be what we're focused on. And again, the key thing here is it has drawn to light, the importance of water for things beyond what you might normally anticipate, right? But at the end of the day, our priorities are clear, and we're doing our best to bring water to thousands of people each day, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay. Race Randle from Maui Land and Pine, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time. We're going to focus in with the Commission on Water Resources from the state and hear about not only what's happening in Maui, but also how this pertains to the rest of our state. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome back to Spotlight Now as we continue talking about the water issues throughout the state. We focused in on Maui, but really this has become an issue that many islands are facing. We will continue on in a conversation, and also reminding all of you who are watching that we are continuing to check our Facebook page and messages as they come in. And we encourage all of you who may be watching on air, if you want to email us, you can email your questions to spotlightnow@hawaiinewsnow.com.
Yeah, thanks for those of you who are weighing in on the conversation. We want to welcome in our next guest, and that is Ciara Kahahane, Deputy Director of the Commission on Water Resource Management. Ciara, can you widen this out for us and tell us, let's talk about Maui specifically and then the statewide. What are we seeing when it comes to drought and our need for water right now?
So overall, conditions are very dry. I think everyone across the state has witnessed this, has experienced it themselves. This winter, according to NOAA, was our second driest winter in 30 years. So just when we needed more rain to recharge our aquifers, we got a very dry season. We're coming off of that into another dry summer. So statewide, we've seen a variety of different drought conditions, from abnormally dry to extreme drought in some places, and that is anticipated to continue through this wet season as well. So we've seen many of the stream gauges that we maintain, that we pay for at the Water Commission, have been over the past few months at their lowest points on record, some of them, not just for that day of the year, but ever.
And when we talked about, obviously, Maui with race from Maui Land and Pine just a few moments ago, but this is a statewide issue. Where else are you seeing some of the more exposed areas, the areas within the state that are in jeopardy, or the areas of most concern right now?
Mm-hmm. So statewide, I think the areas that are having the most difficulty are the places where there's a heavy reliance on surface water and where their water systems are not as resilient as they could be. So on Maui, for example, Maui's having a lot of problems. One, because it's dry, and two, because the water systems on Maui are typically very reliant on surface water. These plantation systems were built to capture stream flow. So in places like Waimea Kauai, for example, we've seen streams like Kauai Koi, which has more than 100 years on record. It's been at its lowest point for that day of the year several times, meaning that, for example, if you're checking the stream gauge on October 7th, that's the lowest October 7th of any year since the 1900s. So these impacts we're seeing on Kauai, on the Hamakua coast of the Big Island, really statewide. And it's particularly pronounced when a system is not connected. There's no continuity between these other plantation systems. So for example, here on Oahu, the Board of Water Supply is able to much more easily move water from one place to another. On places like the Big Island, for example, where you don't have a single integrated water system, that makes it that much more challenging for these system operators to get water and get it where it needs to be.
I think that's a really interesting point. There's a question here from Richard Morey. And Richard, thanks for that. He says, how much water is private and how much is public? How much is from groundwater? How many reservoirs on Maui? You don't have to take all that, but I think really understanding that, especially because we are living in the legacy of our plantation days, that these were sort of private systems that were then in some cases turned public, in some cases not. The county is drawing water down from Maui Land and Pine at the moment, right? That's the drinking water that Race was talking about. But how much of this is sort of a public-private issue, that we have these systems that are maybe not fully integrated in the way that we have here on Oahu?
Yes, so that, a lot of these systems, they could be turned over to the County of Maui, and if they were integrated with each other, that would create a tremendous amount of resiliency on these systems. So for example, if you were experiencing drought in, particularly in the northern part of Maui, you would be able to move water where it needed to go. The fact that the systems have not been set up that way, is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for someone like the County of Maui, for someone like, any county or municipal operator to come in and tie these systems together to create a better future for our communities.
When you hear of what's happening on Maui specifically, and what we just spoke about with Race and the lawsuit that's in front of Maui Land and Pineapple, what is your take on this issue of, these two entities now in a legal battle over who's responsible, and the overall thought about where ultimately the responsibility lies, and maybe who, I mean, I know you're not going to be able to maybe take a side, but just your overall thoughts on, the lawsuit as a whole.
So as you correctly guessed, I can't comment on the litigation, but what I will say is that there are a lot of these plantation era ditch systems and other water systems statewide. A lot of them are aging. I mean, they were constructed more than 100 years ago. There are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of need for maintenance of these systems statewide. The Commission on Water Resource Management actively tries to help these operators find leaks on their system and repair those leaks. Even very simple things like that, you would be surprised how much water can be saved by upgrading these plantation era systems. And so, while I won't comment on who's responsible as in that litigation, I would say we're all responsible. We all as a state are responsible for taking care of this infrastructure, for maintaining it. It's really, rather than focusing on a single person who's to blame or at fault, we need to focus on what we can all do collaboratively to restore these systems to make a more resilient, a brighter future.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear from you. It sounds like having the county take that over would be a good move toward resiliency, in your view. I mean, do you agree with that? We're
very supportive of the county in general taking over many of these legacy plantation systems. And part of it is the county's, their flexibility, to move water around. They've been very good partners for us, and I'm confident that the county of Maui has the best interests of the public at heart. That's one of the things that is the most beneficial, getting these systems into the hands of the county of Maui. They, like us, are part of government and they serve the public. And so me and the chairperson of the Commission on Water Resource Management, we, while we can't do anything, while it doesn't necessarily change our role as a regulator, we're very supportive of the county taking over this and other systems.
What would you say about the voice of the community when it specifically comes to water? Because this continues to be, as we talked about with race, an issue that many people are rightfully so passionate about, that have very strong opinions, that really also inflict a sense of place with Native Hawaiians, and ultimately everything that has happened with water usage on Maui specifically. How do you engage the public, and as someone who's in the public sphere and spotlight, get the public's trust and be able to say that we are listening to you, and engage in those types of dialogues, which may at times be opposing, in opposition of what the plans actually entail?
Mm-hmm. So the Commission on Water Resource Management, our mission is to always to balance the protection of water with maximizing its reasonable beneficial use for present and future generations. And so when we take any action, and by we I mean the 7-person commission, I'm the head of staff, and really they're making all of these decisions. But when they take an action, it's in consideration of the interests of the entire public, benefiting everyone: businesses, schools, hospitals, resorts, golf courses, the places where your family works, the places where your kids go to school. All of those voices are very important to the commissioners as they're carrying out their responsibility, and they're important to me. I very closely consider what the community has to say when I'm making recommendations to the commission. We had a meeting recently in September when we actually invited folks from Honokohau Valley to come and share some of their stories about how the drought has impacted them. And hearing those stories straight from those community members, those residents in the valley who have experienced these real impacts every single day, that's the kind of thing, it makes a huge impression on the commissioners, and it helps them to do their jobs.
There's a question here coming in from Tom, and I don't know if you can answer this, but it might speak to the way this water is sort of, a hodgepodge of sources on Maui. He says, why is Kapulua dry, but other golf courses on Maui are green? So, I'm guessing it's because they're drawing down from different systems, but what would you say to Tom?
Yes, that is one answer to that question, because they're drawing down from different systems. It does depend on which golf course you're talking about, and one of the ones that I like to highlight is one of the golf courses in Ka'anapali is actually hooked up to the R1 system to recycled wastewater. And while that doesn't meet the full irrigation needs of that golf course, that course is being irrigated partially with wastewater from the Honokowai wastewater treatment plant. So that's an example in action of how putting these resources that are already available, Race talked about how that wastewater is available right now in West Maui. It's being put to good use on that course. And if you drive by in Ka'anapali, that golf course is still green.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of those other options, using gray water, wastewater, and other means to help supplement maybe what is needed on the island. Do you think that overall it is just a matter of educating landowners about their options? How do you go about in implementing these other options and making people aware that this doesn't have to be the case, that there are other alternatives out there?
Mm-hmm. So in Maui, we actually are experiencing kind of a good problem, which is that there is a lot of demand for that R1 water now. It's really incredible how far we've come over the last 20 years from figuring out what are we going to do with this wastewater to actually people competing for it. That's really encouraging to see. So part of it is how we get more people to utilize this resource is just cooperation and planning between the state and the county and folks who want to use wastewater. So when the community is making plans, when the county is making its general plan, think about how these sources could come in, how they could be used, where their best uses are, and really plan for the future, plan to utilize that water. Another thing I would say is, right now in West Maui, a lot of people are actually on septic and cesspool still. And getting those people connected up to the wastewater treatment facility is a mutual good. One, it makes more water available, of course, for non-potable needs like agriculture and irrigation. But two, it keeps that water out of our ocean. It keeps our coral reefs healthy. It keeps our ocean clean. It keeps our reefs beautiful and safe for fishermen, for people to swim in, for tourists to enjoy. And so investing in that infrastructure, investing in pipes and in a sewer system, upgrading the sewer system, that is good for everyone.
Yeah, we had Stuart Coleman on here from VI not too long ago, and he talked a lot about the need to do that. 80,000 units across the state need to do this conversion. That's a whole other topic. But what's interesting also that he pointed out, and Ernie Lau was on that same program, is that you've taken something that could be a liability, right? Even after you've treated all this water through wastewater, dumping it in the ocean is not necessarily a great idea, but recycling it in this way seems to be a good alternative use. When we look at water in Hawaii going forward, how much do you think these kinds of systems and this sort of different change in thinking will be needed for us, given that we've had Red Hill and the shortages that we have just because of our natural environment?
Mm-hmm. This change in thinking is absolutely imperative. Absolutely. What we're seeing right now with drought is that they're becoming more severe and more frequent. These weather patterns, they have changed. They may change back. We may see rainfall go back to what it was 15 years ago, but we have to plan for these permanent changes. We have to plan for these changes to stay. So on the commission side, we look at two different kinds of solutions. We look at increasing supply through things like utilizing recycled wastewater, and we look at controlling demand through conservation, for example, or reducing the extent of irrigated landscaping, things like that. As we plan for the future, we really need to approach this issue from both sides.
As we talk about, again, from a larger perspective throughout the state and not only confined to Maui, we talk about affordable housing, we talk about just overall development, which, again, will need water and the resource of that. Looking here in Kaka'ako, for instance, there are more buildings that continue to come up that will ultimately rely on water. Do you foresee some of these other alternative uses being maybe required or implemented into some of these maybe new high-rises in development in order to help lessen the strain that it will have on the existing resources?
Absolutely. One of the buildings that I became aware of recently actually proposed a packaged wastewater treatment facility in the building itself, and to do things like flushing toilets and other non-potable uses within the household, to actually use recycled gray water for that. So these solutions are out there. If we're willing to think big, if we're willing to be innovative and come up with new solutions to these long-standing problems, there is a future for us where we're able to maintain, where we're able to succeed and to thrive and to have this housing. The question is, what are we willing to invest in it, and how big can we dream?
When we think about, you talked about the conservation piece, we're thinking about, magnifying our resources, but also the conservation piece is important. Race talked about that the sort of hierarchy of need, and obviously drinking water comes at the forefront. When we think about irrigating a golf course and sort of the restrictions that you have to put on that, I mean, talk a little bit about how we determine what is necessary and what is not.
So, as I mentioned earlier, the commission is always balancing protection and always balancing all of the different uses against each other, and balancing the present against the future as well. So these kinds of decisions, they have to be made based on the specific facts of each situation. But the commission's guiding star is, of course, the public trust doctrine and these public trust principles. So in general, when a use that is commercial, for example, like the golf course is proposed, a higher level of scrutiny is applied. And the person who wants to use water for a purpose like this needs to show why they need it, and why they need the amount that they're asking for, as well as the absence of feasible alternatives is a very important thing. So why is desalination not an option? Why is water reuse not an option? So that's in general how the commission would approach the problem. But of course, when we're talking about balancing these interests, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about people's lives and their livelihoods. The commission has to put a lot of weight behind the fact that, when they're balancing these interests, they're impacting the folks who work at the golf course. They're impacting the people who work at the resorts that surround the golf course, the restaurants that serve it, and they're balancing that against the ecosystem, against drinking water. It's a very difficult task.
How would you describe with what's happened in Lahaina, and as we look to the rebuilding that is currently taking place, this issue has been brought up once again about how we build a better Lahaina moving forward, and that includes the way in which water flows into the area. There have been, many studies and things that were numbers and statistics that have been brought up that highlighted some of the past of how the city, how the area and town of Lahaina was managed, and with the water resources that it had. What are those conversations like? Are you folks involved in that when you talk about Lahaina specifically, about what's happened, what could happen, and what are you hearing from community members there, and steps that are being taken to maybe listen to the community specifically when it comes to that rebuilding?
I have really tremendous love for Lahaina. I'm from that part of town. My family has lived there for many years. I still have family that lives in Lahaina, and I have family that lost their homes in the fire and they want to rebuild. So I feel that. I feel their desire and I feel for them. It's a very hard thing. It touches one's heart to think of these people who they just want to go home. They just want to go home. We are involved in those conversations as far as making sure that water is available for the rebuilding of Lahaina town. And we're willing to collaborate with the county. We do meet with them very frequently to discuss solutions, to discuss their current problems, and to make sure that we know what their challenges are and we can help them confront those challenges as we move forward.
When we think about the Honokohau ditch, and not just that ditch, but all these plantation ditches, you talked about the need to, see if they're leaking and make sure that that infrastructure is properly maintained. There was a lot of wisdom that went into creating those resources at the beginning, but we have, it's been a long time, let's say, since those resources were built. Is it necessary, do you think, to overhaul these systems with technology of today as opposed to the technology when they were built? What kind of water are we losing at what volume, given that we're relying on these systems that are very old and with the awareness that they are built in areas that are very difficult to get to logistically? You have to admire the ingenuity of the engineers who built those systems to start, right? But yes, understanding the context of where we are now, is it time to overhaul these systems?
It depends on the system. Some of these systems, they probably are in need of an overhaul or a very substantial upgrade. Many of these dish systems remain unlined, for example, which does contribute to a lot of water loss. Water that is not being used gets wasted into the ground almost immediately. And it's getting worse with drought, right? If you have a lot of water, a little bit of loss is not so bad. But when you're talking about, about declining availability of surface water, that's when it becomes all the more important to invest in these systems. The most important thing that we can invest in as far as upgrading this plantation era infrastructure is storage. It is reservoirs. Bringing more reservoirs back into active use, even upgrading them to give them more capacity to hold water and store it for our future needs. That is where the Commission sees a great amount of opportunity for the creation of a more resilient water system.
Given that, where do the resources come from, right? Who's going to pay for it at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm. Yes, this is something that, we need a partnership on. We need partnership between county, state, and private. We all have an interest in thriving communities, and thriving communities require water. So it's my hope that if people are moved by what they hear, if they're moved to take action after hearing about the drought, that they advocate at the county council, that they advocate at their state legislature for more resources, more dollars to be put into rehabilitating this infrastructure, especially the infrastructure that is on state or county lands.
This is our second show in recent weeks where we focused in on water because it's become such an issue, and we're seeing more of these types of headlines. Again, the cancellation of this PGA tournament has really got that conversation started once again about water usage. Of course, dating back a few years to what's happened at Red Hill brought up water again. Mm-hmm. How much of an issue is water here in the state of Hawaii? For the general public who is watching, how concerned should we be about the supply of water, where it's coming from, and just its overall availability when it stands to look at all the issues that we're dealing with the state? Mm-hmm. How much should people be aware about some of the issues of water that's currently happening around us?
Someone asked me recently what I thought the biggest issue facing Hawaii's future was, and I said water, the availability of water. It is a real concern. The situation that we're seeing now with the PGA Tour, the golf course, and the drought in West Maui shows the need to take action early. The need to take action before it becomes necessary, before we're in a crisis situation. So in terms of, I don't want to scare people, but at the same time, I need for people to take this very seriously. We're seeing a drought that has caused streams that should normally be in incredibly wet areas, like Nahiku in East Maui, to go dry, to be at their lowest point. Some of them after West Wailuaiki right now was at its lowest point yesterday after 106 years on record. Never in the last 106 years has that stream been as low as it was yesterday. Thankfully we got a little bit of rain, but when I think about the situation that we're facing right now, I myself worry. I worry about the future.
What, as we individuals right now, what can we do to help with this issue?
So people can start small. There are so many things that you can do. It's really encouraging the number of things that the average person can do. So the American Alliance for Water Efficiency, they actually have a test online that you can go and take that will tell you how you can save more water in your home. It's a fun little quiz you can take. It takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and they'll give you specific recommendations that are tailored to your household. What can I do? You can change your fixtures. I was surprised. As an apartment dweller, I thought, oh, I don't have a yard. What else can I do? It turns out there's actually a lot. For people who do have yards, who have plants outside, I really, really try to emphasize plant natives that are adapted to that area. Those species, they adapted specifically to that climate, to that place, and that's why they need very little water. Irrigation of landscaping actually constitutes a tremendous amount of our water use in the state of Hawaii. And so when we're talking about some of the easiest things that we can do to protect our aquifer, to make sure that our water is available for the future, to make sure that we are caring for our neighbors, reducing the amount of irrigated landscaping is at the very top for me. And finally, I would say, come and testify at our commission meetings. They're usually the third Tuesday of every month. We take oral and written testimony. If you can't appear, you have work, it's in the middle of the day, please submit written testimony. Our commission wants to hear from you. If you're watching this, you are part of the public and we serve you and we want to hear what you have to say.
That's a wonderful way to leave us. Thank you so much for being here today, Ciara. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. We'll be right back after this.
From the moment you wake up.
Hawaii News Now brings you the stories that impact your day.
With more on the breaking news, we go live to Casey Lund.
Ready with the push alert? I'm going live.
We have an update to the breaking news we brought you this morning on Sunrise.
Okay, guys, as soon as this wraps, toss to Mahia.
And we've been covering this story all day.
Now we go live to Mahia for a new development.
Stand by for breaking news. They just captured the suspect.
That's confirmed?
Yes, sources just confirmed it.
The news you need the moment it breaks.
Here on Hawaii News Now.
First alert traffic is like always having a helpful passenger right next to you.
There's a crash up ahead in the left lane.
When we see a backup, we'll tell you live on TV.
That doesn't look too good.
And send an alert to your phone.
I'll type, you drive.
First alert traffic on TV, streaming, and on the Hawaii News Now app.
Keeping you and your ohana safe.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders. And taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, we want to thank our guests for joining us, and thank you for those of you who have submitted questions and comments about this issue. We know that many people are passionate about the water usage and some of the issues that are currently facing not only Maui, but the entire state. We started our conversation, of course, speaking to Maui Land and Pineapple CEO Randle. You heard from him specifically about some of the things that they are navigating through in this lawsuit that has been filed against the company, as well as the counter lawsuit that they have filed back regarding who's right in this debate over what happened with this golf course and the subsequent cancellation of this PGA tournament.
Yeah, a judge will decide, of course, on that. In the meantime, Maui Land and Pineapple is exploring talks with the county. They're reevaluating all of their water resources, doing a full audit, and seeing if there are some resources that they can either lease or sell to the county. You heard Randle saying there that there is a potential for a lot of water that right now is not being used to perhaps to be put online, especially in upcountry Maui, to allow for more water there, and that could lead to more housing. So some potential there. Of course, this is an issue that's facing the entire state, and you heard from our second guest there just about how dire the situation is, and it doesn't matter where you are in Hawaii, we are being affected by this drought.
But you also heard of some of the positives and other alternatives that they're suggesting as ways to navigate through this drought conditions, including the usage of wastewater and gray water, and becoming more integrated within developments and systems moving forward to hopefully alleviate some of the pressures and demand for that water usage as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Maui Land and Pineapple. We'll continue to track that story, as we heard from Randle, who said that the golf course was actually using water during a time where there was restrictions in place, and so they are really countering back against some of these claims, and should be interesting to see how things unfold in the months to come.
Yeah, next week we'll be keying in on the Honolulu Rail Project and Skyline. The second segment set to open on October either 15th or 16th. I'm forgetting the day, but Lori Kahikina is going to be here. Also, Councilmember Tyler Dos Santos Tam is joining us. He has introduced a bill to the City Council that would allow the rail project to start to pursue property to extend it all the way to the University of Hawaii. Very interesting talk ahead.
Yeah, we look forward to that conversation. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you right back here next week Tuesday for another episode of Spotlight Now.